Hello from London and welcome to this tour of the US energy supply transition. Before we start our tour today, let's make 6 defining remarks about the US energy system, also true under a Trump administration. Unlike some countries with state-controlled energy sectors, the US relies very heavily on a market-based system, and that system can deploy capital, technology and expertise faster than any other energy system in the world. The US boasts a diverse mix of very rich energy sources, and oil and natural gas currently reign, but coal and nuclear and hydro and renewables, both solar and wind, play very significant roles, and this diversity provides some security against price shocks or supply disruptions in any single fuel source. Energy policy in the US is complex, involving both federal and state regulations. The federal government sets broad energy policies, but individual states have considerable authority over their own energy mixes, their utility regulation, and their environmental standards. And unlike China, a significant portion of the US energy infrastructure, including power grids and pipelines, is aging, and investment needs are very substantial to ensure continued reliability and efficiency. Then the US has experienced, as we all know, a dramatic increase in domestic oil and natural gas production in recent years, driven by advancements in shale oil and gas extraction technologies. And lastly, the US has seen significant growth in renewable energy sources, particularly wind and solar, and both federal and state incentives along with technological advancements have been driving this trend. Our tour plan today features many interesting things. Firstly, we'll look at energy dominance, then the US's energy trilemma and energy demand, before visiting oil and coal and nuclear, gas including LNG exports, wind, solar, hydro, electricity storage, carbon capture and hydrogen. We'll do 30 interesting site visits. This is the first time one of our tours feature energy dominance. How should we understand that?
Andy, with that context on the features of the U.S. energy landscape, let's look to the U.S. headlines in the first months of 2025, where unleashed and dominance describe the U.S.'s new energy policies. I've spent almost a quarter of my time in the U.S. this year and can attest to the furious pace of executive orders, where 6 alone were signed on the first day affecting energy policy, starting with expectations to reset the U.S. economy in the declaration of a national energy emergency. Noteworthy, the term energy excludes wind, solar energy, and batteries. The order provides for presidential authority over slower bipartisan processes with direction in the subsequently established National Energy Dominance Council, with an aggressive mandate to unleash production of domestic energy resources, particularly fossil fuels like oil and gas and even coal, driving up already record-setting oil and gas production, and also orders federal agencies to streamline regulatory processes and accelerate energy infrastructure such as transmission and expand energy exports, including LNG. As heralded by the headlines, the classic equilateral triangle that frames the energy trilemma is, in the U.S., being reshaped into more of a right-angled triangle with an infinite slope on energy dominance, replacing the environmental sustainability vector at the federal level with the exit of the Paris Agreement and a pause on mileage and energy efficiency standards, and the Energy Dominance Council promoting affordable, reliable, and secure fossil fuel production and even coal life extension. Notably, as Andy characterized in outlining some of the features of the U.S. energy landscape, is that many of the states, and among the most populous, including California and New York, seek to maintain their environmental targets. At the beginning of the year, at the federal level, the Trump push is hard and fast, and we will have to see what legs certain powerful states have to hold firm on the equilateral triangle, holding onto the third vector of sustainability. Let's start our tour by visiting the U.S. energy in numbers, and specifically the ranking in U.S. primary energy mix. Here, as charted, we see the fossil fuels dominating, oil first and gas second, supplying 38% of primary energy and gas at 34%. Coal and nuclear are a distant third and fourth at 9% and 8% respectively, with renewables rounding out the supply, and wind at 4%, and each of hydro, solar, and biofuels all positioned as 6 at 2% in the supply of primary energy. Overall, we see that there's been flat energy demand since 2000, with energy efficiency offsetting economic growth drivers of demand. As we will see later, while there is a mix of imports and exports, the U.S. is basically oil self-sufficient and exports coal and gas while being import reliant on solar panels and wind turbines. And this dominance of oil is evident in oil already supplying 38% of primary energy in the U.S. and in the headlines promoting increased production and aspirations of continued oil dominance. The U.S. currently produces more oil at 13 million barrels per day than second-ranked producer Saudi Arabia and third-ranked Russia, although the U.S. itself only ranks 11th in reserves. Forecasts for 2025 are that U.S. crude production will increase, perhaps to top out above 13.5 million barrels per day, which is almost double that in 2025 when U.S. oil was written off to now being the most productive U.S. industry, with the oil boom expected to continue under the Trump energy dominance and low-cost agenda and with stockpiles rising. As part of the energy dominance agenda, we also see that the U.S. is tightening sanctions on certain oil producers, including Iran, as pressure to achieve Middle East geopolitical goals, and on Canada in the form of tariffs on the U.S. largest import source of oil, some 4 million barrels per day, or 60% of U.S. imports. Andy, let's visit the U.S. oil landscape.
As Mary highlighted, the U.S. has seen tremendous growth in oil production and is now the largest producer of oil at 13 million barrels of crude and 6 million barrels per day of hydrocarbon liquids. Most of the oil in the US is produced at yellow icons from south to north in the Gulf of America, in the Permian Shale, in the Anadarko Shale, in the Niobrara Shale, in the Bakken, in the Alaska onshore North Slope and offshore Prudhoe Bay. We also see on screen and below us the 124 refineries in the US that refine 16 million barrels per day. And the US imports 9 million barrels per day and exports 9 million barrels per day as part of optimizing crude for refineries. Let's visit three places: the Permian, the recently renamed Gulf of America, and the Galveston Bay oil refinery on the Gulf of America. Below us we see the drill pads of the Permian in Texas and New Mexico, which has propelled the United States to be the largest oil producer in the world and self-sufficient in oil. In 2024, the Permian Basin produced about 6 million barrels of oil per day, which was about 45% of the total oil production in the United States. And currently there are 35,000 wells in operation, the result of the largest drilling operation anywhere in the world. The Gulf of America is a major oil and gas producer for the United States, accounting for 70% of domestic crude oil production. And production is concentrated in deep water areas, with some platforms operating in over 2 kilometers of water. Hundreds of offshore platforms facilitate extraction, and there are 3,700 active wells. And the major oil companies like BP and Shell and Chevron, ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips are the largest operators in the Gulf. And here below us we see the Argos platform, which is a key part of BP's infrastructure in the Gulf of America, producing 140,000 barrels of oil per day. The US has very significant oil refinery capacity, ranking as the world's second largest refiner behind only China, processing 16 million barrels of crude oil per day. Below us we see the Galveston Bay refinery, the biggest oil refinery in North America, 630,000 barrels per day of crude capacity, and Marathon Petroleum is the owner and operator. But other operators are Valero and Exxon and ConocoPhillips and Chevron. And the 124 oil refineries are scattered across the country, with concentration along the Gulf Coast, which benefits from both access to pipelines and shipping routes. And the US refineries produce a variety of products, including gasoline, diesel fuel, jet fuel, heating oil, asphalt, and various petrochemicals used in plastics and other materials. And that refining industry is constantly adapting with a growing focus on reducing sulfur content in gasoline and diesel. And while the US remains a major oil producer, it also imports significant amounts of crude. The type of crude oil processed by these refineries is changing, from a growing share coming from sources like Canada, as Mary noted, and the Middle East rather than Venezuela. Crude oil security has been very important to the US since the oil shocks of the 1970s and beyond. And the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve was established with a capacity of 714 million barrels. President Biden's release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to address the significant global supply disruption caused by Russia's war on Ukraine helped to keep the domestic market supplied and to bring down prices for American consumers and businesses. And currently the SPR has 395 million barrels, or is 55% full. It is located in 4 locations, and what we see below us is the Big Hill storage facility, which utilizes naturally formed salt caverns for oil storage at each of the red dots that we see underground. And Big Hill has a storage capacity of about 160 million barrels of crude oil. As Mary noted in introducing the US energy mix, US is now self-sufficient in primary energy, mostly from oil and gas and coal. And if we look over the past period since 1950, we see our consumption of primary energy rose as the economy grew. We can see the growth in production of oil and gas, shale revolution. We can see our imports grew with the economy, and then our exports of energy grew as LNG took off. And we can see the concomitant reduction in imports, leading to the US now being exceptionally well balanced in its primary energy supply.
Now we visit coal, starting with a touchdown on the coal news headlines. The US coal industry has seen a significant decline, yet still accounts for 9% of primary energy and 16% of electricity, and coal consumption is expected to remain stable or even increase somewhat in 2025. This is because the vast majority, around 90% of US coal consumption, goes towards electricity, where demand is outpacing new supply. In terms of the headlines, we also see citing a reprieve on the pace of the Scherer decrease. Several US utilities have announced plans to keep coal-fired units in their generation fleets operating past their scheduled retirement dates, in most cases citing increased demand for the electricity in their service areas. On the coal production front, production peaked in 1990 at over 1 billion tons and has fallen to around 40 million tons, while the US still is leading the world in total proved reserves. The US, while ranking 4th on exports, exports a relatively small portion of its coal, around 20 million tons, with major export destinations that include Asia. Under the Trump energy dominance agenda, coal is one of the fossil fuels that Trump seeks to unleash. And whether this objective is a temporary reprieve or a reversal of a long-term trend of coal decline in the US remains to be seen in the fallout from counter voices positioning for continued coal reduction. So Andy, let's visit the US landscape of coal.
Traditionally a major source of energy across the United States, coal production is now concentrated in very few states. Wyoming, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia are the top 3 coal producing areas. And the North Antelope Rochelle mine is the largest coal mine in the world, run by Peabody. And below us we see the multiple open pits. Located in Campbell County, Wyoming, it's the surface mining operation that's been producing coal since 1983. Currently it produces about 62 million tons of coal per year. It has 1.4 billion tons of proven and probable reserves. And a number of US jurisdictions, including Wyoming, are seeking to repurpose vast coal reserves and infrastructure to clean coal with carbon capture and sequestration. Let's now look at coal-fired power generation and the profile of the US electricity demand and supply mix. The US still has 200 gigawatts of coal power capacity, and below us we see the largest coal-fired power plants still in operation in the United States. As we can quite clearly see on the western side of the US, on the left hand of the screen, there are none in California. And those coal plants still burned 400 million tons of coal in 2024. Let's visit one of those, the Scherer plant. Scherer is the largest coal-fired power plant in the United States, located in Georgia. It has a capacity installed of 3,520 megawatts, 4 units each generating approximately 880 megawatts. But Unit 4 was retired in 2022, reducing the overall capacity, so only 2,640 megawatts are now in operation.
U.S. electric load is growing significantly faster than grid planners previously expected. And as a former electricity system planner, I can attest to this. And it's led by new manufacturing and industry and the growth of data centers. The U.S. has reached an electricity demand inflection point. Electrification, hydro production, reindustrialization, and even severe weather are also contributing to higher levels of demand growth. Reports filed this year with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission show that grid planners expect nationwide electricity demand to grow 4.7% over the next 5 years, while 2022 estimates called for just 2.6% growth, and previous demand had been relatively flat. Peak demand is expected to grow to 38 gigawatts over the next 5 years as well. And on our electric grid, it is not prepared for this significant load growth. And a key risk we are now facing as load growth outpaces deployment of new generation in many regions and exacerbated by low transfer capability in the form of delayed, underdeveloped transmission between the regions is heightening this risk for reliability. Let's now drop down and see the growing prevalence of demand in the form of growth from data centers. We see below us in the US where states like Virginia, California, and Texas lead by size of the bubbles in serving demand of cloud computing and artificial intelligence and crypto mining that are data hungry and power consumption heavy at up to 100 megawatts each and are in effect worthless without reliable power. As an example of the growth, Google's energy usage has been growing at a staggering 20% per year. Amid lagging electric infrastructure, large tech firms are seeking to control their own electric destiny, unwilling to rely on utilities' lagging pace. Here, the Amazons, Microsoft, Googles, Metas, Equinoxes, and Apples of the world seek to secure their dedicated needs outside of the utility supply process and orient towards cleaner energy sources. As another example, Google has entered into an agreement with Berkshire Hathaway electric utility NV Energy to power its Nevada data centers with geothermal energy, and Microsoft has motivated the restart of the shuttered 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant to supply its data centers. So Andy, let's visit a data center in Oregon.
Meta, the parent of Facebook, operates data centers in 18 US states, including Oregon. And here we look down at their data center in Prineville. And Meta's focus on artificial intelligence means that Meta is building facilities to optimize the AI workloads. But Meta is not alone in Prineville. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we can see Apple right next door.
As we mentioned in our side trip to data center demand, nuclear is seeing a revival in interest as an energy supply source after stalling for many years. Currently, nuclear provides 8% primary energy and 18% of electricity in the US and is touted to grow with tech's thirst for power and in fulfilling AI demand. This is translating into aspiration to triple nuclear capacity by 2050 and expectations of 25 SMR license applications by a combination of DOE and private sector support, such as Amazon, who have announced investments in small nuclear reactors. So Andy, let's tour the nuclear landscape in the US.
Below us we can see the US nuclear power plants in operation for a total of 95 gigawatts of capacity. US is the largest producer of nuclear power. 93 reactors in 30 states do that. At the same time, 41 nuclear reactors have already been shut. The average age of the nuclear reactor fleet is 44 years compared to 10 for China, 38 for Europe. And they are mainly pressurized water and boiling water reactors with some advanced reactors. And both the 3 Mile Island accident in 1978 and Fukushima in 2011 contributed to public resistance to nuclear growth in the country. And in recent years, several plants have shut down to economic challenges, largely natural gas competition and the emergence of renewables. Also, life extension required by license after 40 years is costly. So there's been a long hiatus in building new plants after TMI, but 2 projects started in the early 2000s, which I'll come and show you in a moment. An open issue in the US is storage, because the disposal of spent fuel is complex given that there's no national repository and reprocessing is not permitted. As Mary said, the US signed up at COP to increase nuclear threefold by 2050, and so officially targets 200 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity by 2050, with the reality that there are currently no nuclear plants under construction in the US. 8 states, though, are promoting new nuclear. 9 utilities in 18 states are doing feasibility studies and siting studies. And let's visit 2 nuclear plants and the likely site for the Terrapower plant in Wyoming. Our first visit is to the Vogtle nuclear power plant in Georgia. And below us we see the most recently completed and expanded nuclear plant in the United States, and now also the largest nuclear power plant. It's operated and owned by Southern Nuclear Operating Company, co-owned by Georgia Power. On the left-hand side, we see 2 initial units built in the late 1980s. They each have a 1,215 megawatt capacity. And on the right-hand side, we see units 3 and 4, both Westinghouse AP1000s. And they began operation as recently as July 2023 and February 2024. Our second visit, nuclear-wise, is to the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, recently renamed the Christopher M. Crane Clean Energy Center. And what we see below us is where the partial meltdown of reactor number 2 in 1979 raised very significant nuclear safety concerns for the country. Operations at Unit 1 ceased in 2019 due to financial and regulatory challenges. But Constellation Energy aims to restart Unit 1 by 2028, and as Mary mentioned, a 20-year deal with Microsoft will power AI data centers with nuclear energy. And here in Scherer in Wyoming, we see the place where Terrapower plans to construct their natrium reactor. Wyoming approved a state construction permit for the project in December last year, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is reviewing the reactor's licensing application until 2026. And Terrapower expects that natrium reactor to be operational by the year 2030, and a new partnership ensures a steady supply of highly enriched uranium fuel for its operations.
Before we move to gas, let's take a side visit to look at U.S. electricity generation by source. And this happens to be for the week of January 25th to February 1st, 2025. Here we can see how natural gas remains the largest source at 200 gigawatts and load follows, dealing with the intermittency of sun and wind. This is followed by nuclear at 100 gigawatts running flat as baseload. Coal is also joining at 100 gigawatts doing some load following, and then wind varying between 90 and 40 gigawatts due to its intermittency. The daily solar cycle is contributing 60 gigawatts at peak, and hydro of 30 gigawatts rounds out, with both pump storage and battery storage playing an insignificant role. From nuclear, we now visit the gas and LNG export landscape in the U.S., where natural gas provides 34% of primary energy and 42% of electricity, and is set to grow further in contribution and exports. In the headlines, we see this natural gas growth trajectory in strong growth to satisfy growing demand in the power sector, yet at higher price points due to a combination of increased domestic demand from data centers and electrification and growing LNG exports. LNG itself has been boosted by Trump's reversal of the Biden-era pause on LNG export approvals and includes not only Gulf Coast sites, but pursuit of new Alaska-based development that will see the export capacity more than doubled by 2028. So Andy, let's see this growth on the ground in the U.S., starting with the massive U.S. pipeline systems that supports the penetration of gas in the U.S.
The U.S. gas transmission system, which is also connected to Canada and Mexico, is truly massive, stretching over 5 million kilometers of pipelines. And this network includes large diameter, high pressure interstate pipelines, but also smaller intrastate pipelines that reach consumers. And the network crisscrosses the lower 48 states, delivering natural gas from production areas to storage facilities and to consumers. And it plays an absolutely critical role in delivering natural gas for various uses, homes and businesses for heating, cooking and hot water, fuel supply to power plants for electricity generation, and provides natural gas for industrial processes in the United States. As Mary said, natural gas is the largest source of power in the United States, and below us we see the largest gas-fired power plants in the country. They have a total installed capacity of 500 gigawatts. They can be ramped up or down quite quickly to meet fluctuations in electricity demand, making them ideal for balancing the increasing use of renewable energy sources like solar and wind. Let's visit one of those power plants, West County in Florida. West County Power Station contributes significantly to the electricity needs of Florida. It is the largest gas-fired power plant in the United States at 3,750 megawatts. And despite the rise of renewables, natural gas power generation is expected to see continued growth. In 2023, 16 natural gas power plants of 8 gigawatt came online. In 2024 and 2025, new natural gas-fired power plants are expected to come online with a total capacity of a further 8 gigawatts. And all of them that are being built are high-efficiency combined cycle plants. Natural gas in the form of LNG is the largest form of energy exports from the United States, and there are 8 plants in operation today, and we can see them down the coast from Cove Point to Elba Island to Plaquemines to Calcasieu Pass, Sabine Pass, Cameron and Corpus Christi. 90% of the cargoes in 2022 went to Europe, and there's a further 80 million tons of capacity under construction, we can see in the box on the left, and a further 88 million tons approved but not yet under construction. Very significant. And on his first full day in office, President Trump issued an executive order lifting the moratorium on LNG exports, approvals that had been instituted under President Biden in early 2024. And subsequently, the Department of Energy resumed processing LNG export applications. Let's quickly visit 3 of those LNG plants: Sabine Pass, Calcasieu Pass and Plaquemines. Here below us in Louisiana, we see the Sabine Pass plant of Scherer, which exported the first US LNG cargo in 2016. And the first project constructed in the United States today produces 30 million tons from 6 trains that we can see below us. And it has a diverse group of around 12 long-term off-takers, and Sabine Pass LNG has been delivered to more than 20 countries via Panama, via the Atlantic, and via Suez. Here below us we see the Calcasieu Pass plant in Louisiana, owned and operated by recently listed Venture Global, producing 20 million tons of LNG per year. And the terminal incorporates advanced modular liquefaction technology, employing multiple pre-cooled single-mix refrigerant blocks, and was constructed in record time. It already began operations in January 2022, but is not yet commercial, although Venture Global has just announced that it should go commercial in April this year. And the plant is involved in dispute where, even though hundreds of cargoes have been loaded and sold as spot by its owners, several of its long-term off-takers feel done by. And some have started arbitration against Venture Global. But Venture Global also has a second venture, Plaquemines LNG, which started production recently in December 2024 and is now exporting LNG. And below us we see the facility's capacity, which will eventually increase to 27 million tons per year, which is very significant. And an expansion could boost that capacity to a further 45 million tons per year. Absolutely spectacular.
From U.S. dominance and growth tracks in natural gas, we now land on wind, which provides 4% of primary energy and 11% of electricity in the U.S., and is dealing with some recent headwinds in escalating cost, approval delays, and is now out of favor under the new administration. Despite the U.S. Department of Energy projecting strong growth, the Trump executive orders and fossil fuel dominance mandates are chilling the U.S. wind industry, with threats to stop leasing federal land for wind farms and slamming offshore wind. Impacts to industry players from escalated costs and delays and uncertainty result in companies like Ørsted taking a $1.7 billion hit. And now with Trump, created headwinds are stalling and disrupting the momentum of key states such as Maine on offshore. So Andy, let's see the state of wind in the US.
Below us at the blue markers, we see the major wind farms in the United States. The US now has 150 gigawatts of wind power installed, growing very rapidly in Texas, in Iowa and Oklahoma. Offshore was first paused due to rising costs and inability to reach financial closure at contracted prices, and then practically stopped by the Trump administration. Nearly all of the wind farms are onshore, with only South Fork, Block Island and coastal Virginia operating in the offshore. But wind power relies on large-scale transmission expansion, which is stalled, and this will increasingly impact the expansion of wind power. Let's visit 3 wind farms: Alta Wind in California, South Fork in the offshore, and Azure Sky Wind. Here below us in California, in the Mojave Desert, we see the Alta Wind Center, capacity 1,550 megawatts, constructed in multiple phases, largest in the United States. And you can see the rows of Vestas and GE turbines that leverage the strong winds in the Tehachapi Pass. Below us we see South Fork, the first commercial scale offshore wind farm in the US Atlantic. The wind farm sits 60 kilometers southeast of Rhode Island's Block Island and 48 kilometers off Long Island in New York. And 12 Siemens Gamesa 11 megawatt turbines power the wind farm. And it incorporates the first offshore substation ever manufactured in the United States. It is probably going to be a while before we see another offshore wind farm operating in the US. We also traveled to Texas to see the Azure Sky Wind and Storage Project, which is Enel Green Power's first large-scale hybrid project. It includes 350 megawatts of wind farm and 180 megawatt hour battery storage, and that battery storage serves to deal with transmission constraints, which are becoming so real across the country. As Mary noted at the outset, the United States is relying on this domestic manufacturing, with specifically GE and Vestas manufacturing large wind turbines in the country. And below us we see the Vestas plant in Brighton in Colorado, which specializes in manufacturing nacelles containing the gearbox and the generator and blades, and we can also see the rail loading facilities.
Wind farms and their inherent intermittency reinforce the significant strengthening of the U.S. electric system required to accommodate intermittent and low load factor renewables. In this side visit to the U.S. electric transmission system, we highlight the gaps between what is needed and what exists in the graphic from 2020 to 2035. The gap is evident in U.S. grid interconnection backlog that's jumped up 40% with increased wait times as more renewables were spurred by IRA incentives amid intensified ongoing challenges in environmental permitting, with many as 13,000 permits and public NIMBYism leading to 15 to 20-year cycle to complete for major transmission. Wind and solar curtailment are rising rapidly due to these T&D bottlenecks, with debottlenecks from supply chain constraints for transformers and switchgear. As well, even the U.S. end customer is feeling the pain in outages that have doubled due to the grid overloads. Yet a meaningful decrease in the interconnection queue is very unlikely despite the new administration's stated objectives to unleash transmission development amid grid interconnection costs, which have risen rapidly. Let's next turn to solar power in the U.S., where the sunny states of California and Texas and Florida have taken the lead, and solar appears to be surging as the top source of new generation, with 2025 expectations of record high installations. Yet all is not sunny for solar, considering that Trump's declaration of the national energy emergency excluded solar from the definition of energy resources. So solar is an industry on edge, with concerns about new tariffs and eliminations of incentives increasing the cost of installations. These concerns and the momentum of solar are motivating bipartisan action to reinforce support for solar so that it continue to dominate in capacity additions. So Andy, let's look at the solar landscape in the U.S.
Below us at each of the panels on the US map, we see the more than 5,000 solar farms across the United States. And there are 280 gigawatts of solar installed. And specifically, the Inflation Reduction Act offered many incentives to expand solar in the country. The US has some solar domestic panel manufacturing capacity of 30 gigawatts, which is not enough to meet the current demand, and in 2024, solar panel imports came from Asian countries like India and Vietnam and Cambodia and Malaysia and Thailand, often proxies for China. Let's visit 3 of those solar farms. No area in the United States has seen growth in solar like the Southern Mojave Desert in California. And we look down and see the many solar farms in operation and under construction in the 2 white blocks. This is truly world scale. The 11 Mile Energy Center is located in Arizona, and as we can see below us, it includes 300 megawatts of solar panels, but also 1,200 megawatt hours of battery storage. It's been developed by Ørsted of Europe, operational since October last year, and it supplies energy to Meta's Mesa data center. Rooftop solar is growing very rapidly in the United States, and the Westmont Rooftop Solar in San Pedro in Los Angeles is one such example. Below us, we see the world's biggest rooftop spanning 15 acres across the Westmont Distribution Center, and we can see the 50,000 solar panels generating 16 megawatts. But importantly, Westmont also serves as a testing ground for cutting-edge solar technologies, and pilot projects explore smart grid systems and energy storage solutions.
Our next stop is hydropower, where in the U.S. hydropower provides 2% of energy and 6% of electricity and has been stalled in additional contribution. Of note, Trump's policy supports hydro development. Recent newspaper headlines highlight the small scale of current hydro developments in the U.S., the connection between First Nations and hydro development, and that U.S. hydropower faces operational and regulatory challenges amid climate policy shifts. Let's see the hydro position in the U.S. now.
The U.S. is the 4th largest producer of hydropower in the world, with 102 gigawatts of installed capacity at 239 major hydro plants. And below us, we see the Mississippi, the longest river, but only 200 megawatts of hydropower. We can see the Missouri, the Colorado, and the Columbia River, which is the most significant river for hydropower generation, with its concentration of hydro plants in Oregon, and Washington State. But in North America, the average hydropower plant is nearly 50 years old, and there are currently no major hydro plants under construction. Let's visit two hydro plants, Grand Coulee and Hoover. Below us we see Grand Coulee Dam, which is a concrete gravity dam on the Columbia River in central Washington State. It is the largest power producing dam in the United States with a generating capacity of 6,800 megawatts. And it was built during the Great Depression. It created the Franklin D. Roosevelt Lake that we can see below us. And that is the largest reservoir in the United States by surface area. And it is used for hydroelectric power generation, but also for irrigation and flood control. And the dam is one of the most important engineering achievements in American history, recognizing its constructed displaced over 10,000 people. The Hoover Dam on the Colorado River that we see below us is also extraordinary in many ways. It is the tallest dam in the United States. It's the largest concrete dam in the United States. It generates 2,080 megawatts, and it's a major source of hydroelectric power for California, Nevada, and Arizona. Also constructed during the Great Depression, it helped to control flooding and improve water storage for irrigation, but it also had some negative aspects such as the displacement of Native Americans and the disruption of the Colorado River ecosystem.
To deal with the low load factors of renewables, the U.S. has been rapidly installing batteries, especially in Texas and California, leading to a surge in deployments, which are featured in the recent news headlines. However, these installations are still insignificant scale, and power security crises have been predicted. Most recently, battery storage concerns have appeared in the headlines from the fallout of the Moss Landing fire, which has created new challenges and opportunity. Challenges in moratoriums on utility-scale storage, and opportunities in accelerated interest in alternative technologies. At least $2 billion projects in Arizona and Georgia have been abandoned since Trump's inauguration. Notably, batteries are not included in the definition of energy that is supported for U.S. dominance. So Andy, let's visit the battery and pump storage landscape on the ground in the U.S.
The U.S. has been a leader in the development of pump storage, with the second largest capacity in operation in the world. However, that capacity pales in comparison to the needs of the growing intermittent system and is also challenged by environmental concerns along with technical and economic viabilities. So today there are 43 plants totaling 22 gigawatts with an estimated storage capacity of about 550 gigawatt hours. And below us in blue and marked with a P, we see the largest pump storage stations in the United States. That system has a maximum demand of 500 gigawatts and is so large that even 22 gigawatts of pump storage plays a small role in the system. There are currently no large pump storage systems under construction in the United States. There are a total of 60 projects across 21 of the states with a total capacity of 55 gigawatts, which have received or applied for preliminary permits from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but I suspect that many will not go ahead given the stringent requirements for technical and economic viability, and the fact that numerous projects face significant opposition on environmental grounds, and the fact that various developers are vying for projects in the same markets. Battery storage is still insignificant but rising fast in especially California and Texas. And below us in green and marked with a B, we see the majority of the large operational battery storage systems in the country. Battery electricity storage in 2024 saw a bumpy year for the sector, in part due to the continuing tailwinds from the Inflation Reduction Act. And while installations are expected to increase in large markets like California and Texas, we also expected to see growth in Arizona, Nevada, New York, and Florida, which are increasingly turning to energy storage to ensure grid viability. Let's visit Bath County pump storage in Virginia and Moss Landing battery storage in California. Below us we see the Bath County Pump Storage Plant in Virginia, and with an installed capacity of 3,000 megawatts and an effective storage capacity of 24 gigawatt hours, it can generate for 8 hours and is the largest in the US. And Mary, this is bigger than Brookfield's Bear Swamp Pump Storage that you well know from your time there. Located in a valley that was specifically chosen for its unique geology, it has two natural reservoirs that are separated by an elevation difference on the left and on the right of 380 meters. And Bath County can start up and generate electricity in as little as 2 minutes. Below us here in California, we see the largest battery storage facility in the world, and in the United States. It's Moss Landing Energy Storage Facility. And we can see a natural gas power station of 1,020 megawatts owned by Vistra, Phase 1 battery storage of 300 megawatts and 1,200 megawatt hours, Phase 2 another 100 megawatts and 400 megawatt hours, and already began in operation in December 2020 using lithium-ion batteries. The sad news, as Mary previewed in the headlines, is that Moss Landing largely burnt down in a fire in January. And that's indicative of the risk of lithium batteries, including the fire being very difficult to contain once it has started.
We mentioned earlier there is a growing reliability risk to the U.S. electricity system, motivating the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation to issue power grid warnings. This risk stems from the aging power infrastructure, the doubling of demand growth to almost 5%, the intermittency of solar and wind energy, the explosion in new demand in the form of data centers, and long lead times for building generation, transmission, and storage. We do not see that these risks and the drivers of accelerated demand and delayed expansion of supply and transmission will easily or readily be addressed. As we come to the end of our tour, we will touch down on carbon capture in the US. As the US does not have a price for carbon, progress with implementing CO2 utilization and storage have been very slow beyond use of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. The headlines feature much aspiration via funding contributions largely made in 2024 to bolster carbon capture initiatives. In the new energy dominance mandate, there is uncertainty regarding the fate of support given Trump's freeze of funding under the IRA and infrastructure laws, which pause subsidies for the technology along with critical CO2 pipeline rulemaking. So Andy, let's visit the state of carbon capture in the US and assess whether it is the future of clean energy or false hope.
The United States does not have a price on carbon emitted into the atmosphere, so carbon capture is done by companies to reduce their reported emissions and in response to various, usually tax incentives. Various projects are in operation or planned in the biofuels, in the cement, in the direct air capture, heat and power, in support of an industrial hub and waste energy sectors. And these projects use basalt or oil fields or depleted gas reservoirs or saline reservoirs to store the CO2. And below us we can see the operational carbon capture plants in the United States. Let's visit two of those, Chute Creek and Stratos. The Chute Creek gas processing plant in Wyoming is the largest operational carbon capture and storage facility in the world, and it has a storage capacity of 7 million metric tons per year and provides CO2 for use in ExxonMobil's enhanced oil recovery projects. It captures CO2 from natural gas processing and injects it underground for enhanced oil recovery. Our second visit is to Stratos, which is a direct air capture facility in Texas, and it is designed to capture 500,000 metric tons of CO2 annually. Construction is now roughly 94% complete, and the facility is expected to be operational later this year. Occidental Petroleum and BlackRock have invested significantly in Stratos. And what we can see is that large industrial fans pull ambient air into the direct air capture system. They then do chemical capture because the air passes over specialized sorbent materials or liquids that selectively bind the CO2 molecules. They then have to do heat release. The CO2-rich sorbents are heated and released, capturing the CO2 as a concentrated gas. And then there's compression and storage. The purified CO2 is compressed and either stored underground in geological formations or utilized for industrial applications like enhanced oil recovery or synthetic fuel production. You can see all the facilities under construction below us. You can also see the sorbent regeneration because the sorbents and solvents are regenerated and reused in the capture cycle, making the process continuous.
Now let's touch on hydrogen. And gray hydrogen produced from natural gas remains the dominant form of hydrogen in the US. Similar to the state of carbon capture, the US is slow in forming the 7 hydrogen hubs that it aspires to develop. And with tax credits still unclear, their future is increasingly uncertain. So this uncertainty dominates the headlines. Andy, let's see the state of hydrogen in the US landscape.
The Biden administration, 7 hydrogen hubs were proposed for the United States, each with significant funding. The Appalachian Hydrogen Hub is there for abundant low-cost natural gas and carbon dioxide sequestration. The California Hydrogen Hub is to produce hydrogen from renewable sources or from biomass. The Gulf Hydrogen Hub is for large-scale hydrogen production using both natural gas with carbon capture and renewables-powered electrolysis. The Heartland Hydrogen Hub is to help decarbonize the agricultural sector's production of fertilizer and to decrease the regional cost of clean hydrogen or to use clean hydrogen for power generation. The Mid-Atlantic Hydrogen Hub is to repurpose historic oil infrastructure and use existing rights of way to support the development of hydrogen production facilities using renewable and nuclear electricity. And the Midwest Hydrogen Hub is to produce hydrogen from renewable energy and from natural gas and from low-cost nuclear energy, and aims to use hydrogen for steel and glass production, for power generation, for refining, for heavy-duty transportation, and sustainable aviation fuel. And the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub is to produce clean hydrogen exclusively via electrolysis from renewables. How this will all play out in the Trump administration is soon to be seen. Let's visit one hydrogen production site in California. The largest green hydrogen plant in the US operates in California. It is named SoHyCal for Solar Hydrogen California. Produces 1 ton of hydrogen per day and can be scaled up to 3 tons per day in the near future, completely powered by photovoltaic power and using proton exchange membrane technology in its electrolyzer.
Thank you for joining our tour today. In concluding, we offer the following takeaways, which start by revisiting some key elements regarding the U.S. energy landscape and transition pathway. First, the U.S. is the world's largest market-driven system with speed to deployment. And energy policy in the U.S. is complex, involving federal and state regulations, which until recently were somewhat aligned on the energy trilemma equilateral triangle, which has recently been gyrated by new federal policy introduced fast and furiously, but perhaps not inconsistent with regime changes. For example, in 1981, Ronald Reagan dramatically reversed Jimmy Carter's energy conservation policies. In a great statement, Reagan actually removed the solar panels that Carter had installed on the White House and emphasized deregulation of the energy industry, particularly for oil and gas, and significantly cut funding for renewable energy research. Clinton's term in power prioritized environmental regulations and supported the Kyoto Protocol. In 2001, George W. Bush withdrew the U.S. from the Kyoto Protocol and increased energy policy, emphasizing increased domestic fossil fuel production and oil drilling prospects, for example, in the Arctic. Obama's administration in 2009 introduced the Clean Power Plan to reduce power plant emissions and signed the Paris Climate Agreement. Trump's 2016 administration withdrew from the Paris Agreement, repealed the Clean Power Plan, and pursued the first stage of U.S. energy dominance to expand fossil fuel development and rolled back various environmental regulations. So, all along these decades, key states proceeded to advance their own energy agendas, heavily vested in renewables, which had the effect of increasing the cost of energy in those states, stressing affordability. So now, at the federal level, as we introduced at the outset, the trilemma equilateral triangle has been replaced, where the environmental sustainability vector is replaced by reliability and security in the form of energy dominance of fossil fuels and efforts to improve affordability and reliability in the repeal of regulations. So, big question mark for 2030, what tracks will these take in terms of reversing? Are they merely a temporary retreat? Remains to be seen in the interplay of the federal push and the state push back, and overall concern about policy stability that needs to motivate needed investments. So we will see, and don't know at this point where it will lead for 2030. Again, thank you for joining us.